Welcome back to Genesis chapter 7. In the prior video, we looked at verse 7, where Noah and his family enter the ark. We're going to skip a few verses that cover some of the same types of stuff we've seen before in terms of the animals coming in 2 by 2 and so on. We're going to pick up in verse 11, so let's read it together. Ento ex hexakosiasto ete, ente zoe tu noe, tu deuterumenos, hebdome kai ekadi tu menos, te hemera taute, and then we'll finish up with it here in a minute. So let's begin with this big number. So in the, with the ento there, and then hexakosiastos is the 600th. So in the 600th, and then ete here is the noun for year. And so you'll see that is a dative plural there of etos. And then we have yet another, so you can almost like break the thought there. And then ente zoe, so in the life to Noe of Noah. So in the 600th year, in the life of Noah. And then we have yet further appositional material to deuterumenos. So deuteros here is, of course, the second. And then menos is going to be month. So in the second month. And then we have even further information. So hebdome here, hebdomos is 7th. So it's on the 7th. And then ekadi here is the 20th. So this will be the, if you put those two together, you are left with the 27th. And then it's tumenos, of the month. So it's on the 27th day of the month. And then once again, we have further sort of dative stuff. But let me, before we get to that, I'll point out something here. So if you look at this up in an English translation from the Masoretic, you're going to see that it's not the 27th of the month, but it's the 17th of the month. And so there's some debate about why that is. Why does the Greek translator add 10 days to get to the 27th? And one theory, and this is presented in Weber's notes on Genesis, is that the Greek translator is trying to make the total duration one exact year. If you look ahead to 817, so we'll get to that in many weeks, I'm assuming, you'll see that the flood, it subsides on the 27th day of the month. And so if you do 27, that's a full perfect year as opposed to a year and 10 days. So that seems fairly plausible. Maybe it was a textual variant in the Hebrew tradition. Not really sure, but kind of an interesting little difference there between the Greek and the Hebrew. And so, as mentioned, we land here before we get to the rest of it with the te hemere or humera taute. So on that very day, or excuse me, on this very day. Now let's finish reading. Now we finally get to the verbs. We have all this chronological background. Now we get to 2 verbal clauses. You'll see I've structured them in a way that brings out, they're kind of partially chiastic nature, where you have verb, the subject of the verb, subject of the next verb, and then you end with the verb. And so there's a nice structure here. So let's read it. Eragesan, pasai he pegai tes abusu, kai hoi kataraktai tu uranu, enioik thesan. So this first verb here is from chregnumi, and you can see with the ason ending, it's missing a theta, so you don't see that there, but this is a third plural aorist passive indicative. It's because it's a liquid, and it's an athematic verb, and it does all sorts of weird stuff, but it is an aorist passive, and it means to burst forth. And what is bursting? Pasai, all the pege, this is the springs or the fountains or something like that of the abyss. So the idea here is that you have these reservoirs of water under the earth in the quote-unquote abyss, and they are bursting forth. So you have water coming from below. And then the kataraktai or kataraktes, that's going to be cataract, as you can probably tell in the English cognate. It's waterfall, or perhaps the floodgates, if you will, of heaven now. So you have the abyss on the bottom half, if you will, the uranu here above, and it's from anoigo, enioik thesan here. You can see a more clear thesan ending. This is also a third plural aorist passive indicative, and that, of course, means to open. You see a nice aorist passive bookending that. So all of the floodgates or the waterfalls of the heaven were opened. And so what's interesting about this depiction of the actual main verbal event of the flood is that you have water coming not just from above through rain, but also coming from below. Now, not to get overly scientific on this, but let's talk about these springs of water of the abyss. It is interesting that recent scientific studies have demonstrated that there appears to be water in enormous quantities. It would be even bigger than all of our oceans combined beneath the Earth's outer or lower mantle, I suppose. And it's not exactly just like a pool of water. It's in a form where it's bonded with the rock in essence, but it functions as a large reservoir of water that could have not only been the source of the oceans, as opposed to like some folks in the modern scientific community argue for a comet or asteroid, something like that, but it still holds a lot of water. Another article to this effect, so this was from 2014, but much more recently in 2015, another article here that says there's new evidence for oceans of water deep in the earth between that upper mantle. And it's bound to the rock, but it can cycle in and out and transition to actual like real water as opposed to being in a crystalline form. So food for thought in terms of the depiction of the flood. You essentially have this supersaturated atmosphere in the Uranus that opens up and rains, and then you have these reservoirs of water deep in the earth that burst forth as well. So interesting little scientific lesson there. I'll leave it to you to make of that what you will, but that's Genesis 7:11.